What did the greatest minds of human history say about the future? Peering deeply from the present back to the past, we can bear witness to the incredible insights that uncovered into a future which we have come to know as reality. We begin with Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher, genius and prophet whose predictions played out quite accurately. His most productive years were of the 1880s, yet his ideas are still prominent in understanding where we are now as a civilization and for time still to come. You see, Nietzsche was really the child of his time. Certain people are consciously aware of certain problems in their era of civilization that other people are oblivious to, whereas others are still stuck in older times of the past, are terribly solipsistic, or just too weak-minded. For Nietzsche, he was really a man of the future, as his awareness made him terribly conscious and burdened by his era's societal and psychological issues, of which mankind are still diseased and poisoned by today. These issues certainly played a considerable role on the account of Nietzsche's own insanity and early death. Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster, for when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. Nonetheless, it was in some sense his fate for a man of that intelligence and desire for truth to be gripped by the real problems of humanity in Europe around his time. These largely included the death of religion, the so-called death of God, the impacts of industrialization, and the increasing power and emergence of pernicious political parties, nations, and the state. Nietzsche foresaw many of the atrocities and cultural movements of the 20th and 21st centuries that led to communism, Nazism, and the world wars. Throughout Nietzsche's published works, his attacks on socialism and the proletarian movement were some of his most consistent. He called socialism the tyranny of the meanest and dumbest, and claimed socialism attracts incompetent people out of resentment of being incompetent relative to better people. He further linked the resentment he saw in Christianity with that found in socialism in his work The Will to Power, saying that socialism is the residue of Christianity and of Rousseau in the de-Christianized world. Rousseau, who is often viewed as a proletarian and socialist thinker and influencer who inspired the French Revolution, is described by Nietzsche as a moral tarantula, reducing Rousseau to a pathetic idiot who had to shame other people to escape his own misery. Rousseau largely influenced the French Revolution of 1789, which for Nietzsche was an uprising of proletarian men of resentment, which continued its expression 100 years later in the exhibition of communism and large-scale socialism. I hate Rousseau, even in the Revolution. It is the expression in world history of this combination of idealist and lowlife. The bloody farce in which this French Revolution played itself out, its immorality, makes little difference to me. What I hate is its Rousseauian morality, the so-called truths of the revolution, through which it still has an effect and persuades everything superficial and mediocre to join its side, the doctrine of equality. But there is no more poisonous poison, for it seems to be preached by justice itself, while in fact it is the end of justice. Equal for equals, unequal for unequals. That would be the true voice of justice. And its consequence? Never make unequals equal. The fact that this doctrine of equality was surrounded by such horrors and blood has given this modern idea, par excellence, a sort of glory and radiance, so that the French Revolution as a spectacle has seduced even the noblest of spirits. Nietzsche, for the most part, saw socialist and equitable movements, such as the French Revolution, as essentially antagonistic to life, being advocated on the back of resentful and envious people. He further believed that society is built mostly on the backs of higher individuals. As for him, most of human society is a weak, blind, and degenerative herd. Clearly a very nice guy. In his eyes, the French Revolution helped to pave a path towards a doctrine of self-styled justice for equality, which was no more than a rationality to mask envy and resentment. For Nietzsche, this was the core feature of socialism. Within his masterpiece, The Genealogy of Morality, he discerns socialism as a legal system conceived of as sovereign and universal, not as a means in the struggle of power complexes, but as a means against all struggles in general, something along the lines of Dühring's communist cliché, in which each will must be considered as equal to every will. That would be a principle hostile to life, a destroyer and dissolver of human beings, an assassination attempt on the future of human beings, a sign of exhaustion, a secret path to nothingness. Nietzsche believed that if socialist goals are achieved, society would become degenerate and conditions for superior individuals and higher culture would disappear. A higher culture for Nietzsche was where the noble class could exercise their superiority in nobility, savagery, and animalistic instincts. The opposition to this was Christianity and socialism, who, along with other doctrines, Nietzsche claimed wanted to even out through equality to suppress the instincts of people with naturally better abilities. In Twilight of the Idols, he wrote against the idea of equality espoused in socialist doctrines. Nietzsche believed greatness came from difference in ability, and difference in status was a natural result of difference in ability. Equality, a certain definite process of making everybody uniform, which only finds its expression in the theory of equal rights, is essentially bound up with a declining culture. The chasm between man and man, class and class, the multiplicity of types, the will to be oneself, and to distinguish oneself, that, in fact, which I call the pathos of distance, is proper to all strong ages. Equality for Nietzsche, or at least in the sense of equity, was a march towards death. Things that are the same are stagnant. He rather believed people should suffer to become stronger, and that the weak should accept a natural state of being in accordance with those above them. For Nietzsche, socialism was a politics for the weak, and was not based on justice, but merely power out of feeling inferior. To men who with regard to every cause keep in view its higher utility, socialism, assuming it is really the rebellion of those who have been oppressed and held down for millennia against their oppressors, represents not a problem of justice, with its ludicrous feeble question, how far ought one give in to its demands, but only a problem of power. How far can one exploit its demands? Despite his views on social hierarchies and difference in status that many people would be irritated by, socialism, built on the back of ideas of equality, was exploited as an ideology heavily in the 20th century. In the name of justice, a justice which was reflected over the deaths of more than 100 million people, the Maoist revolution, the Soviet Union, the killing fields of Cambodia, and so on. Socialism itself can hope to exist only for brief periods here and there, and then only through the exercise of the extremist terrorism. For this reason, it is secretly preparing itself for rule through fear, and is driving the word justice into the heads of the half-educated masses like a nail so as to rob them of their reason. after this reason has already greatly suffered from exposure to their half education, and to create in them a good conscience for the evil game they are to play. Socialism can serve to teach, in a truly brutal and impressive fashion, what danger there lies in all accumulations of state power, and to that extent to implant mistrust of the state itself. Nietzsche's awareness of the envy, resentment and fight for power between lower and higher classes allowed him to be more than a little concerned with the future conflicts of Europe. As he wrote in Will to Power, "Nevertheless, in many places in Europe, there may be violent hand-to-hand struggles and eruptions on their account. The coming century is likely to be convulsed in more than one spot, and the Paris Commune, which finds defenders and advocates even in Germany, will seem to have but a slight indigestion compared with what is to come." The Paris Commune was a short-lived government that governed Paris from March 18, 1871 to March 28, 1871. It was established after the defeat of French forces in the Franco-Prussian War and the subsequent capture of Emperor Napoleon III. The Communards, as the government and its supporters were known, sought to establish a radical socialist government in Paris with a focus on decentralization, worker control of factories and other forms of property, and other socialist policies. The Commune was marked by a number of significant and often violent clashes between the Communards and the French government, which ultimately led to the suppression of the Commune and the execution of thousands of Communards. The Paris Commune helped inspire and spill into further radicalization and revolution of socialist movements. Karl Marx even called the Paris Commune a glorious harbinger of a new society, which served as an early prototype for Marx's view of an ideal, established future socialist and proletarian government. The idea of a working-class government coming to power and implementing radical socialist policies resonated with many people in other countries, and the example of the Commune was seen as a potential model for similar revolutions in other places. Marx and Engels especially used the experiences of the Paris Commune as an example to further develop the idea of dictatorship of the proletariat, which they believed should be the first step towards communism. As Nietzsche said in the same year, shortly before his mental breakdown of 1889, the 1871 Paris Commune is a small uprising compared to what is to come. Indeed, the late part of the 19th and early 20th century was rife with this uprising of the communist masses in the most intense and bloody way. Although he made clear his concern regarding the dark side of communist envy through Will to Power, he still was by no means naive to the guilty fruit of industrialization and capitalism and its effects on the working class. As you will see from our other videos, for instance, Why Consciousness Will Destroy Mankind, the bureaucratic and industrialized modern and postmodern capitalist condition creates cold people. Schizophrenic madness, dilution of the senses, the disparaging of emotions, and scorn of the body, a recipe for making a meaningless and diseased life. As Nietzsche soon says here then, it is no surprise that such people fell for socialism, the powerful envious storm of miserable and wronged workers. Nietzsche writes in Human, all too human, the foreboding of the European reaction to this stately, industrialized, robotic working condition. Poverty, cheerfulness, and slavery. This is likewise a possible combination, and I can say nothing better to the workmen who serve as factory slaves, presuming that it does not appear to them altogether to be a shameful thing to be utilized as they are, as the screws of a machine and the stopgaps, as it were, of the human spirit of invention. The piping of the socialist rat-catchers who wish to inspire you with foolish hopes is continually sounding in your ears. They tell you to be ready and nothing further, ready from this day to the next, so that you wait and wait for something to come from outside, though living in all other respects as you lived before, until this waiting is at length changed into hunger and thirst and fever and madness, and the clay of the triumphant beast at last dawns in all its glory. Every one of you should on the contrary say to himself, it would be better to emigrate and endeavour to become a master in new and savage countries, and especially to become master over myself, changing my place of abode whenever the least sign of slavery threatens me, endeavouring to avoid neither adventure nor war, and, if things come to the worst, holding myself ready to die, anything rather than continuing in this state of disgraceful thraldom, this bitterness, malice, and rebelliousness. This would be the proper spirit. The workmen in Europe ought to make it clear that their position as a class has become a human impossibility, and not merely, as they at present maintain, the result of some hard and aimless arrangement of society. They should bring about an age of great swarming forth from the European beehive, such as has never yet been seen, protesting by this voluntary and huge migration against machines and capital and the alternatives that now threaten them, either of becoming slaves of the state or slaves of some revolutionary party. And as he says in a later part of Human All Too Human, it is only far in the distance in the undertaking of vast colonizations that we shall be able to observe how much rationality, fairness, and healthy suspicion Mother Europe has incorporated into her sons. The European virtues will travel along with these workmen far beyond the boundaries of Europe, and those very qualities which on their native soil had begun to generate into dangerous discontent and criminal inclinations will, when abroad, be transformed into a beautiful savage naturalness and will be called heroism, so that at last a purer air would again be wafted over this old, overpopulating and brooding Europe of ours. Not only was there great partisan politics prior to World War I, and the uprise of communism, as Nietzsche writes, all political powers nowadays try to exploit the fear of socialism in order to strengthen themselves. But Europe's new emphasis of wealth and power, governed by the state, and the roaring nationalist spirits of the time, led to wars and authoritarian bureaucratic regimes characterized by increasing wealth and capital, including Nazi Germany. As Nietzsche wrote in 1881 in The Dawn of Day, they are urged on day and night by a terrible impatience at seeing their wealth pile up so slowly, and by an equally terrible longing and love for those heaps of gold. In this impatience and love, however, we see reappear once more that fanaticism of the desire for power which was stimulated in former times by the belief that we were in the possession of truth, a fanaticism which bore such beautiful names that we could dare to be inhuman with a good conscience, burning Jews, heretics, and good books, and exterminating entire cultures superior to ours, such as those of Peru and Mexico. The means of this desire for power are changed in our day, but the same volcano is still smouldering. Impatience and intemperate love call for their victims, and what was once done for the love of God is now done for the love of money, i.e., for the love of that which at present affords us the highest feeling of power and a good conscience. Nietzsche was wary of where society was headed in its spirit and culture, how large the state would get, how the dilution of the senses leads to divorce from real life, and he put it down largely to the industrialization and emphasis on profit and wealth. No longer were those ever so fashionable religious and Christian values vogue. No, profit, wealth, and material became the new god. The resulting conclusion being workers reduced to a worthless mere cog in a machine for the state, leading to an increasing temptation towards conquest and war of others in the typical man. Tempting indeed. Bureaucracies in excess are extremely dangerous. They are predicated on a top-down structure and allegiance to their organizer. The increasing ant-like nature of mankind was compensated for by continually investing into the idea of state and nationalism to avoid guilt of feeling oneself weak or inferior. Nietzsche knew this, which was why he wrote Inhuman, All Too Human. The entire problem of the Jews exists only within national states, inasmuch as it is here that their energy and higher intelligence, their capital in will and spirit accumulated from generation to generation in a long school of suffering, must come to preponderance to a degree calculated to arouse envy and hatred, so that in almost every nation, and the more so the more nationalist the posture the nation is again adopting, there is gaining ground the literary indecency of leading the Jews to the sacrificial slaughter as scapegoats for every possible public or private misfortune. In other words, Nietzsche is saying the successful behaviors and beliefs displayed by the Jews aroused hatred and envy by their goodness, and the result of increasing nationalism was to view other groups more divisively, causing all the more envy on the account of those doing better in regard to the ideals of wealth and profit birthed by industrialization and capitalism. Nietzsche also believed in the inevitability of the darkest and bloodiest of wars because of how safe and peaceful society had become. There was no longer an outlet for this bullish and adventurous energy which had characterized men going off to war for so long. In the stillness of peace, there in his eyes brooded an energy in man that was not being properly satisfied. Culture can in no way do without passions, vices, and acts of wickedness. When the Romans of the imperial era had grown a little tired of war, they tried to gain new energy through animal baiting, gladiatorial combats, and the persecution of Christians. Present-day Englishmen, who seem also on the whole to have renounced war, seize on a different means of again engendering their fading energies, those perilous journeys of discovery, navigations, mountain climbings, undertaken for scientific ends as they claim, in truth, so as to bring home with them some superfluous energy acquired through adventures and perils of all kinds. One will be able to discover many other such surrogates for war, but they will perhaps increasingly reveal that so highly cultivated and for that reason necessarily feeble humanity as that of the present-day European requires not merely war, but the greatest and most terrible wars. Thus, a temporary relapse into barbarism, if the means to culture are not to deprive them of their culture and of their existence itself. The partisan political struggles, the influx of radical socialism and proletarianism, the explosion of nationalism, and man's increasing reliance on the state all culminated into what we now call the 20th century. The largest, most terrible wars and social movements mankind has ever experienced, and perhaps we are still yet to experience the worst of what is to come.